Hello, hello. Welcome to Unlapped. Gang is all here. It's good to see you guys. I'm sure you're both exhausted. Does anyone want to be like, no, I'm fine?
I think we're both pretty exhausted, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
To give the listeners some context, it is the Wednesday after Abu Dhabi. I got back on Monday. I think Nate was a little bit later coming back. We were trying to make sure that we weren't both in the air at the same time. It's a weird feeling at the end of a season like that, because the final evening in Abu Dhabi, there's so much going on, so much to get through, so much to get excited about, having a new champion as well. And then you kind of get back and it all just feels a little bit flat. But hey, good to be on the show, and still loads we can talk about, even from this season. So,
yes. Remember, if you are watching on YouTube, like this video, subscribe to the ESPN F1 YouTube channel. You'll find content there 365 days a year from those two. If you're listening somewhere else, awesome, great. Just hit us up with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Is there always? I always feel like there's always like an odd letdown too once the season is over. Like once something has come to an end, there's just always like this big run up to the end, to the finish. And it's like the day after Christmas where you're just like, oh, that's it. No more. And I realize the no more is only for like 3 months, but still, like there's always like a slight letdown.
Yeah, I saw a very depressing sign or picture on Instagram that said, 90 days till Melbourne. And I wanted nothing to do with that for at least a few more weeks. It's you get to the end of this season and it's a weird one because they're so long, these seasons now. By the time we get to the conclusion, it has really been a slog. I was just going back and making some notes of this season, before this show, and there's some stuff that happened 6 months ago, and it feels like a different season. So, yeah, weird finish. I hate finishing in Abu Dhabi as well. I think that it's a race that doesn't do the season justice in that way. But yeah, me and Laurence are probably in the same boat where for the next few weeks we're pretty happy that there's no racing. It's just good to get away, calm it down a bit, and then by the time middle of January is around, we'll be talking about testing. So people don't have to wait too long.
I think there's like a selfish part of me that is bummed, and like we all know why. Like the ESPN contract has come to an end, so like F1 is going to Apple next season. So there is a certain amount of finality to it for at least us in some respects. So I think that's where maybe part of
That
my
makes sense.
depression comes from. I know you guys talked about this like at great length on Sunday, but I don't want to like do this podcast without at least touching on the fact that the season is done. Lando Norris is the champion. You've had a few days to like digest it now, or how has sort of like the aftermath, the digestion period, how has that sort of reshaped, refocused, given you any different perspective as to how the whole season went down?
I think it's nice that we've got a new world champion. I think in any season when you can point to multiple drivers on the grid who have a championship behind them, that's always a good thing. That's not to say that it wouldn't have been great if Max had won it, because I think we'd have this incredible story to get stuck into of how Red Bull turned it around, and they still did all that work. It's just it didn't quite pay off by 2 points at the end of it. But I think having Lando there is interesting. I think he's going to bring like a kind of fresh perspective on all that. Nate wrote a brilliant piece for anyone who hasn't been checking the website this week about why Lando is a very different champion to previous ones. He's very open about stuff. I think that was very evident from his champions press conference, where you would ask him one question and he would give you about 4 different answers on completely different things, asking himself questions about where he went wrong and when he had self-doubt and stuff like this, and just being incredibly open about that. And I suspect Lando will actually continue that and perhaps double down now that he has the championship behind him. We saw a lot of nervous energy in the weekend before, or the 2 weekends before stealing that championship. So I think going into a new year, it'll be interesting to see what he's like. So in a way, I think it's a very positive thing for the sport that we got a different champion, and also good to see that he wore a kind of gold helmet at that Abu Dhabi test on Tuesday, just kind of signifying that he was the champion. And then next year, he's already said that he's going to run the number 1 in his car as well, which I think is always cool, seeing that number 1 move between cars and teams.
Yeah, I always felt sorry for Lewis Hamilton's mechanics. He only gave them a couple of runouts with that number 1 on the car. Yeah, I think I'd echo everything Laurence said. I think what's nice as well what's great about getting a new champion is, I mentioned this on the pod we did the other night. it's surely gonna lead to a more fired up Max Verstappen. You know, you've been champion for 4 years. You want to come back and reclaim that championship. But there was also a sense I got that Charles Leclerc and George Russell especially saw for the first time somebody from their generation, you know, winning. I know they're not too dissimilar in age from Max, but, you know, came into Formula One, you know, 2018 and 2019, those two guys, and Lando came in 2019 with Russell. I think it was the first time those guys had seen that tangibly of like one of our guys is now winning the championship. That does something to the rest of the grid as well. You know, it gives people an incentive to go and win it themselves. And yeah,
I think it almost makes it seem attainable
yeah,
in some
totally.
ways, because I think for a long time Max was just sort of running away with it, and Red Bull was on this pedestal, this mountaintop, and before that, let's be honest, it was Mercedes. And there seems to be a changing of the guard in some respects, and it does make it seem more attainable for the other guys, because Lewis Hamilton is regarded as one of the greatest to ever do it, and Max Verstappen is regarded as one of the greatest to ever do it. So when there is a new guy there who is just the new guy, it sort of normalizes it a little bit. Not that any of us could go out and win the world championship, but there is a sort of like a normalization to it when it is somebody new.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, no, that's a really good way of putting it. The normalization side to it, and I think as well, it's made a lot of those guys realize, you know, you're you you don't necessarily get many opportunities to win it. You know, Charles Leclerc was very interesting on Sunday in Abu Dhabi. He hinted that the first kind of 5, 6 races next year absolutely key for him. You know, you can read into that how you want. Obviously, he's looking at his own title winning ambitions there, and yeah, and next season suddenly becomes very important with the new rule change. So yeah, I think it's brought that. Not that it's never front of mind for those guys, but I get the impression that for a lot of them, it's now. I think Nicole, the way you said it is perfect. It feels attainable. It's a tangible goal. You know, when Schumacher stopped winning those championships and Alonso did, it was like, oh wow, someone else can win titles. When Hamilton was beaten by Verstappen, it was like, oh, you know, someone else other than Mercedes can win titles. So it does have that galvanizing effect for sure.
I want to take a look back at some of the things that we saw this season and sort of just like pick our favorite moments and things like that. In terms of the best races for a win, I mean, they're also pretty recent, but I mean, you go back to Austin, and Austin was sort of the moment when you looked at Max Verstappen and thought, this is real, because he had had that super dominant weekend. It was pole, it was the sprint race, it was the actual race itself. And he started to admit, yeah, I am in the title fight. And that's sort of, I think, the moment where it truly became a three-man race. And then also, then you look at Mexico. If we got to the end where we did, where Lando was the champion, you can't overlook Mexico and just how dominant he was on a completely different level, like a different planet. Like he won by 30 seconds or something obscene. That was sort of the weekend where, yes, Lando was good in Austin. He didn't get the win, but he was good in Austin. And there were some sort of like, team dynamics at play where I think going into that weekend, we thought this could be favoring Oscar. And when Lando came out of Austin and wasn't the one that was sort of behind, the eight ball, and then went from there to Mexico and did what he did in Mexico, I think you have to look at those two races as best race win to put him in the position that he was in at the end of the season to actually win the championship.
Yeah, I think it was a fair. I think by the same, I mean, yeah, Lando in Mexico was his best race probably of the season, from what I can remember. It was classic Lando, you know, when everything was in those conditions. You know, he was great. You know, I think Lando does need the car to be in a certain place, but when it was like that, then he was spectacular. I was actually going to go left field here. I thought I'd be smart, and I was going to put Max Verstappen, but him at the Nürburgring. Not that we will watch the race, but him winning the sports car race. It in between, it should be noted, winning in Monza and winning in Baku, which were two wins that basically revived his season. The fact that he then even had the mind and the motivation to then go and race at the Nordschleife and just everything associated with that in terms of aura. I think it's, to be honest, that 3 week spell I think is probably the best 3 weeks any Formula One driver's had for years. But I just thought I'd be smart and cheeky and put that one in because so rare you see a driver do that and race outside of Formula One. to do it like Max did, I think it kind of added to this mystique of his season, didn't it? Of like, not only is he making McLaren pull their hair out, he's also just gone and had this insane weekend at possibly the most daunting circuit in the world. So I'll be cheeky and put an asterisk next to mine, but I'll say that.
Yeah, I did wonder why Nate had slipped in best race win into our run plan before we started. It's because he had a great answer.
I just thought it was missing, and then I suddenly was like,
it.
I can be super. Yeah.
No, I think that's a really good answer. But I was actually going to pick a Max one as well, as in the best race win by any single driver this year, and look back right to the start of the year, and probably pick Suzuka. There's Suzuka and Imola, 2 races that he won. But I'd say Suzuka wasn't a fantastic race by any stretch. In fact, it was probably one of the most boring races of the year. But the fact that Max went and stuck it on pole position there with a car that was really not behaving as it should do or to his liking, and against 2 McLarens that were incredibly well sorted, had a huge amount of successful development over the winter, and had basically turned up, some way ahead of the rest of the field. For Max to go and just put the flag in the sand there, just make sure he got one victory early in the season. As is the case, as he pointed out at the end of the year, actually, like all your results across the year are as important as another. But that was one where all the odds were really stacked against him, and he just did what Max Verstappen does and put in an amazing qualifying lap that then allowed him to control the race from the front.
I was going to consider Suzuka as well, but then I thought that was actually more the pole. And it wasn't necessarily the race, because the pole led to the race, because there wasn't a lot of passing. There wasn't a lot of opportunity there. But that pole, that was the moment. Who was it? Was it Alonso in the pen who just literally stopped talking because he had seen what Max did to put the car on pole, and was like, that was insane. But I thought that was more like a qualifying thing and less of a race thing. So I took it off my list.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, it was entirely because of the pole position that he managed to do that. But I think, when you look at these victories, it is just so much that comes together to put the car in the right, well, in that case, the car wasn't in the right place, but to put the car on pole position. Yeah. I mean, that's fair. Yeah.
This is turning into a Max Verstappen appreciation show.
It's a
I
love
love
fest.
this. But I mean, so Laurence mentioned Imola, and until he mentioned it, that just slipped my mind. But that, if we haven't got it on our run plan, but that start was unbelievable at Imola when he went around the outside of Russell and Piastri. And it's good when a Max Verstappen move. I was actually looking back through this when we wrote our review of the season. George Russell said that's the best overtake I've seen in a long time. When you got George Russell saying that about Max Verstappen, it's pretty special. So Max Verstappen, from what I can tell from what we're doing here, pretty much the candidate for the best racing driver of the season if he didn't win the championship.
Yeah, probably. I agree. Do you have a favorite podium performance? Because there actually are a few.
I have one that
You have one.
I think for me is probably the best podium for a long time. That's Hülkenberg at Silverstone. I thought that was so great to see. It was such a long time for Hülkenberg. And to be honest with you, that stat of him not having the podiums and never, most starts, you'd kind of forgotten that he could even score a podium. It was kind of like, well, he's just never going to do it. And then suddenly he's running in third, and we were sat next to each other in the media center, Laurence and I, in Silverstone. And there's a moment where I looked at him and I was like, and Laurence had already worked this out because Laurence is better at reading a race than me. I was like, Hülkenberg's going to do this, isn't he? And Laurence was like, yeah, I think so. And I was like, I can't believe it. And it was actually, sometimes sometimes you're like, I want this result because this driver deserves it or whatever. As those laps were ticking down, I was like, please do not mess this up, or don't have there something happen that takes us away. And obviously all the focus was on Hülkenberg, but also, and this is something that, I think Sauber generally got overlooked quite a lot in Formula One. That was such a nice way for them to mark their final season in Formula One. Obviously it's now Audi, but for Sauber to get that podium, they always have been they were kind of the ugly duckling a little bit of the grid. I always felt they were a small team, but they never really performed in a way that got people excited. They had a couple of title partnerships over the years that didn't really lead to anything stepping forward. So for Hülkenberg to do it and for it to be with Sauber, really, really nice story, and a genuinely kind of feel good moment. And yeah, I was just watching it back again, and it's the only sad bit of it for him, and I do take umbrage with this now. I look back on it, is McLaren completely ignoring him on the podium, which does not look good when you look back at it. I think they don't think they meant to, but you look at it now and you're like, as a visual, it's such a shame because he's kind of there spraying champagne on his own. But selfishly, sorry, I'm taking ages to answer this one. I went down to the Sauber garage and hospitality after that and kind of got a bit of champagne sprayed like all over me while I was down there. So that also has a personal kind of resonance as well. But I think it's hard to top that one.
Yeah, it is hard to beat that one, isn't it? I'd say honourable mentions for Isaac Hadjar in Zandvoort. I think that was a great moment. And then Carlos Sainz's 2 podiums for Williams, which, you know, if we had rewound to the start of the season to say that Carlos Sainz was going to be getting podiums in Baku, but then perhaps a more impressive one in Qatar, because it's not a circuit that, in theory, they should have been particularly competitive at. So those are good ones. And then, yeah, just I don't know, we've got a bit of a theme going here with Max, but I was thinking, like, which podium was really important for the title race? And Max's podium in Brazil, I thought was a particularly special one, but also one that kind of just kept it alive going into the final 3 races, which was important as well.
And it had that great onboard of Ocon. Was it Ocon, Nicole? I think you flagged it, where they start in the pit lane together.
Yes, it was Ocon. It's the onboard.
And Max just disappearing
they started from pit lane.
through the field. Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, he was like, wait for me. And no, just gone. No, it's like, I totally agree. I don't think you can overlook the Hulkenberg moment in terms of not just for the team, but also just for him and just having that moment. And I think one of the things that I really like the most about when you have those moments, and we saw it with Lando winning the championship, how the other teams and drivers respond. You know, Sauber didn't have enough champagne, so teams were, handing over the champagne, and the drivers' responses, and that's like the heart of the story. That's the feel good, the emotional connection, and I those are the moments to me that always kind of stand out the most. Did you guys have a favorite rookie? Like for me, it's Antonelli, for I think a lot of reasons. One, you've got this kid who comes in considered in a lot of ways like a generational talent, but he's also just that, he's a kid. To be able to handle the pressure, the ups and the downs, the expectations, to be the guy who replaced Lewis Hamilton, just the amount that was resting on his 18-year-old shoulders throughout the season, to in a lot of ways live up to those expectations, and to take a car that, his teammate won a couple of races, fine, but there were moments you picked him to win a race. I mean, it was not out of the realm of possibility. But then there were also moments like with him saying sorry to Max, and how he had to deal with the online bullying. And then, Max lost the championship by 2 points. And essentially there were the 2 points, if you want to look at it, that, Kimi gave up in Qatar. You cannot take those 2 points and boil it down to one single moment. But just the human side of him going up to Max and being like, I'm sorry. He's an impressive young man, seemingly on the track and away from it. So for that, he is my favorite rookie. Not to discount what Isaac Hadjar did. I think, from race 1, where he crashed before they even took, the green flag, and had to overcome all of that and then put together the season he had. That's not overlooking him. I think I just developed this soft spot for Antonelli, and I'm going to go with it.
Yeah, I'd say Kimi as well. I think, for all the reasons you outlined, just very likable kid. And probably had the highest pressure, highest stakes. It would also be biased if I said Behrman, because he's from Chelmsford, which is just down the road from where I grew up. And I quite often go on BBC Essex to talk about him. So I've got it, there's a link there with Behrman. But I think this rookie season is going to go down in history, isn't it? Just unbelievable talent. Bortoletto was great as well. But if we're saying favourites, hard to pass Kimi. You just want to root for that guy, and you just want to see him doing well.
Yeah, I'd agree. Kimi is like an incredibly likable guy. I really was quite a big fan of his going into the season. I managed to sit down with him last year and already kind of like realised that this guy was, a superstar in the making, not just because of what he could do in a car, but also how he acted and how he talked away from it. So I'm also a big Kimi fan. But I think Hadjar probably is the one who exceeded expectations the most. I mean, I don't think any of us had on our 2025 bingo card that he would be promoted to Red Bull the following season. And that is in part because of how badly it's gone for the drivers who have been in that second seat alongside Max Verstappen, but it shouldn't take away from the results that he's put together. So I think Hadjar is perhaps the most impressive when you just stand back and look at it. But I think the real unsung hero here is Bortoleto, Gabriel Bortoleto, going into a Sauber team that has a lot of change going on. Carl really wasn't very good at the start of the year, but then did go a lot better towards the end of the year. And his performance over a single lap versus Nico Hülkenberg, who has always been a great qualifier, was really quite impressive. I think they more or less ended up equal over the season on qualifying stats. But I'd say for a driver to come in as a rookie with a pretty difficult car, and to beat someone as seasoned as Hülkenberg or get close to someone as seasoned as Hülkenberg in the same car, that is hugely impressive. And I don't think Hadjar really had the same teammate comparison, and that's not against him. He can only beat the guy that he's up against. And I think if you look at Antonelli's record, understandably it's quite a long way off George. But that's why I think Bortoleto, there's a really good case for saying that he was the best rookie this year.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It's a hard one to rank, actually.
It is hard.
But
it's a hard one to rank because there were so many rookies too.
But they all had,
and they all have a great
case as well, which is actually so rare. Usually you have, this guy stood out and this guy kind of looked pretty terrible. But yeah, they all had a moment, and I think all four of those guys are going to be in Formula One for a long, long time, which I think is awesome.
10 years from now, we could come back to this and be like, remember the 2025 class of rookies? Like these guys, there are, like you were talking earlier with Lando and George and Charles coming into the sport at relatively the same time. When and if those guys become champions, you go back to the season in which they entered. Like that could happen again with the 2025 season. Do you have a favorite, Laurence, like season-long storyline?
It's going to sound like a broken record here, but I was thinking about this, and the best storyline to follow was Max Verstappen's turnaround and getting back into the title fight. Because if you'd asked us basically after the Dutch Grand Prix, we would have said, Oscar Piastri's by far the favourite. Lando's got a chance if he can get the results together if something goes wrong for Oscar. But I don't think many of us would have picked out Max. And the fact that he made it a three-way title battle into the final race was absolutely brilliant. So I couldn't really look past that, because that is the thing that has got me most excited as this season has progressed, is the fact that we did have three drivers fighting for the title.
I think so. Yes, agreed. I think for me, the favorite season-long storyline is the fact that there was a championship battle. Coming off a few seasons in which the championship was almost a foregone conclusion. There was a slight battle last year where Lando sort of put himself in a position to question it ever so slightly. But Max still clinched the title in Las Vegas a season ago. That's still well before the season ends. So the fact that there was a championship battle this year between two drivers, let alone three at the end, and there were question marks as to who it was going to be. There were points in this season where different drivers led the championship. To me, just having that be a part of the conversation week in and week out, and not really knowing. I mean, we hadn't gone into the final race of the season where there were more than two title contenders since 2010. So to have that be an element of surprise and what's going to happen in a season in which maybe some of the racing, like you guys talked about earlier, like maybe some of the racing on track wasn't the best, to have questions about who would be the champion made it a hell of a lot more fun and dramatic.
Yeah, agreed. I was going to say Max or the championship. So there was one I'm going to throw in there. I do think that in the grand scheme of things, nothing for a while is going to beat the Max season. I'm going to keep it in the Red Bull family, and I'm going to give some props to Liam Lawson for kind of reviving his own Formula One career, kind of saving it from the brink, because I think Laurence and I were both there in Suzuka. He looked kind of broken when he got demoted so quickly. I mean, that was pretty much as humiliating as it gets. 2 races at the top team. I thought he dealt with it very, very well, and actually kind of seeing him rebuild that season, rebuild himself, get himself to a position where not only was he performing well, but Racing Bulls and Red Bull have decided to keep him around for another season. I thought that was nice. I thought it was, I didn't want to see a great, promising talent like that just kind of thrown on the trash heap, so to speak. So not obviously one that captured a lot of attention and headlines, but just as a nod to it, thought it was very nice to see that. And full credit to him for being able to do that.
I mean, it's an interesting one because had he not been chucked out of Red Bull after 2 races, I don't think, and he'd stayed there the whole season, I don't think he'd be in F1 next year. I think we'd be talking probably about Yuki in the Red Bull going into 26. I would have thought Yuki would have the measure of Isaac across the whole year. Maybe not. Maybe Hadjar would have shone through and still taken that seat. But I think that was such a big moment. And, we were quite critical of Red Bull for ditching a driver after 2 races, not giving him the chance to get back in it. But if you look at it retrospectively, then it does seem as though that was the thing that actually saved Lawson's career. Obviously, conversely, it's probably buried Tsunoda's. I mean, now he's a reserve driver, so he's still there to put pressure on whoever's struggling next year within the Red Bull fold. But I think it's a really key moment there for Lawson if he goes on to have a more successful career beyond this, that he actually got dropped by Red Bull was a key thing. But then we've seen that a number of times, haven't we, with Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, drivers that seem to be broken coming out of the Red Bull racing team and have gone on to have impressive careers elsewhere.
I mean, we've said it about Sergio Perez too. Like, there were parts of us
Yep.
last season where we were like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? And this season, we're looking at it a little differently. Like, suddenly he doesn't look so bad anymore. In fact, suddenly he looks great.
And maybe not that irrelevant as a fact. I'm sure Liam Lawson has probably thought about this. Can you imagine in Japan pointing at Liam Lawson and say that guy is going to outlast Helmut Marko and Christian Horner within the Red Bull company? The 2 guys that both promoted him and then sat him down and said, "You're out." They're both now gone. And that maybe speaks to some of the chaos around the decisions around, his career. And you're right, Nicole, around the Checo decision, around, Lindblad. I think Lindblad's coming up too early, the rookie coming up now. And there's, we'll talk about Marco in a little bit. There seems to be a link there. So yeah, within that mess of Red Bull, it's good that he's survived. And I'm sure that, he'll reflect on that irony at some point, over the off season, because I don't think anyone would have predicted that in a million years.
Favorite race of the season, not for what happened on the track, not for like a storyline, just selfish reasons. Favorite race of the season.
I would say
Hell, it could be a race you got to stay home.
I would say Austin. All of us being together, and Austin was great. Austin is just, for me, is the best race that we go to in Formula One. I loved that one. Obviously, you mentioned it, Nicole, as well. It was kind of the last one we're doing as big as ESPN does it. So yeah, that was pretty special. And I think we got to do that podcast where I sat on top of a bull as well, which was pretty memorable. I'm not going to top that ever in my career. So from a selfish reason, I can't look past that. Not that, just to clarify to people listening, it wasn't a real one, sadly, but everyone who's seen my WhatsApp profile picture, which is that, how did you
It
get?
had been a real
It had
bull.
been. Oh yeah. It looked like a very healthy,
Yeah.
healthy bull at one point. But yeah, and I'm just sat on top of it, and so many people on my WhatsApp are like, how did you manage to get on top, and how did you? And I'm like, guys, I don't know who you think I am. My cowboy skills are not that good, but yeah, that whole weekend was pretty special, I think.
Yeah, that's a very good shout. I'm not sure I'll forget Las Vegas for a while. I don't know whether it's because it's my favorite, but it was certainly memorable. Just the chaos that ensued when we got the note through from the FIA that both McLarens were under investigation. I don't know what that says about me. Probably just that I like maybe.
I think you enjoy the drama.
Yeah, the drama a bit too much. But Vegas is always quite a fun one, actually. We were all together there, so that was good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I can't argue with Nate. Austin was really fun this year, wasn't it?
Yeah. Austin was fun. Vegas was fun. I think for me personally, of those 3, because those are the only 3 I get to go to. I think I liked Miami the best. I don't know why. Didn't you and I, Laurence, we got thrown on. The race ended early. There were some questions about rain or whatever. And then you and I at the last minute, they're like, you guys have to go on ABC to help fill time for 3 minutes because like local news and like the World News Tonight or something, they're not ready. So like you guys have to go. So it was like a fair amount of chaos at the end. So selfishly, I think I might go Miami as being my favorite race of the season. This last one though, this one feels mean. I'm not gonna lie. Worst driver of the year. I'm
This
not
was a
answering
Nate
first.
Saunders edition. So late on, I felt like
I'm gonna make
we
you
had
go
a lot of
first.
bests, didn't we? You know, best this, best that. I was just jotting things down that I thought were in the rundown. Um, I mean, to me, just given the hype around him and given the fact that he also replaced a driver that I think kind of got a bad rap, was hard done by. But Colapinto was probably the standout guy that just didn't perform across the season. But to cut him some slack, Alpine wasn't exactly a car he could thrive in. But you got to beat your teammate at least or be close. And Colapinto's just never looked that close. So I think he was actually quite lucky to stay on for another season. That'd be my pick.
Oh, the way you started that is that you feel sorry for the guy who you replaced. I thought you were going to say Lewis, but
Oh no.
So
Well,
did I.
Lewis could be. I mean, Lewis did win a sprint race, but
I would
maybe
say
he's the obvious one.
Yeah.
Lewis is mine.
Well,
Lewis
I
is
think he's the
mine.
most disappointing driver of
Yeah.
2025.
Mhm.
My worst driver, I just went back and looked at, versus teammate qualifying performance and other stats like that, and 15 Q1 eliminations, and that was Lance Stroll. But I have to say, going into the season, I may have predicted some of those. I mean, certainly that Alonso would beat him across the season. And, there were a few highlights for Stroll. You got a few 7th place finishes. I think there was one in Silverstone, Zandvoort springs to mind. So, there were highlights as well. But then that's with Lewis, Lewis had those high points, but the end of the year especially was just so disappointing. So in terms of just disappointment, because my expectations are understandably very high for a 7-time world champion, I'd say Lewis. But sorry, I don't want to steal your thunder there, Nicole. I feel like I've already just stolen your.
No, that's fine. Like I think there is a difference between worst driver and most disappointing driver. So you can make the argument for Colapinto. You can make the argument for Stroll. I just kind of can't. I love Lewis. Don't get me wrong. I love Lewis. I love what he has done for the sport. I love what he has done for the sport away from the sport. Um, I think he's, I think he's one of the greatest of all time. But because of that and the expectation, seeing him in red and the expectations that we had for him going into this season and the expectations I think we all had for Ferrari, the way that they finished last season going into this season, having both of those drivers there, and then to just have Lewis not do anything. He was outperformed Leclerc, the majority of the season. Yes, you can talk about the sprint race win in China all you want, but it's a sprint race win. Yes, points are awarded, and it probably comes down to a little bit at the end of the season for the champion. But if you were looking at Ferrari, you wanted so much more for Lewis. You expected so much more for Lewis. You expected so much more for Ferrari. And it just never happened. And then you look at the way it ended and how Lewis was going about and how he was like speaking every time he was knocked out and in Q1. There was just it was like a gut punch every time. And it's hard to shake. So while I don't think he's the worst driver by any means, I personally can't shake the disappointment that came with what we were hoping for. Even if he didn't win a race, he wasn't on the podium.
Yeah, and he was so far from our kind of memories of what Lewis Hamilton is as well, So I think
Yes.
that actually, if you're judging it based on, I think Laurence made a good point there with Lance Stroll. Like the expectation is kind of there that he's not going to beat Alonso that often. The expectation for Lewis was sky high, and he if it was worst in terms of your expectations pre and post, I think it's probably Lewis. But yeah, he at least had a few moments where he looks at least semi decent. But do you think Ferrari have had this conversation, like the higher ups of like, is this guy this bad? Like, do we need to think about what we do after 26? Because Ollie Behrman looks pretty.
I don't know. You wrote the book on Ferrari. You tell us.
Well, I'm saying, Ollie Behrman looks pretty.
Over there.
Ollie Behrman looks pretty good right now. As you sit there, obviously he's only had one season, but that's the alarming thing. If you're Ferrari, is suddenly you spent all this money on Lewis, and he just doesn't look that good. But he has always said 26 is the year to judge him on. I still think that is going to be the case. But if anything, he's reset the expectations now to be pretty low, and that might help him next year. Who knows in terms of how he looks, but yeah, I think Lewis is a fair answer.
If Ferrari are thinking that, then they've got their priorities entirely wrong. Like to look at,
but this is Ferrari, right? So
like,
you could imagine they are thinking
whose fault it is. It's the 7-time world champion who we couldn't, build a car that was competitive enough for him, and the car which he actually won a race in, where it turns out it was illegal when it got to the Grand Prix. I mean, I think Ferrari need to have quite a good long look at themselves before they're pointing the finger directly at Lewis. But I think
but
Lewis.
So John Elkann did that, didn't he? Pretty much, he pointed the finger.
Yeah,
at
he
Lewis
did. Yeah.
Right. Let's talk less and drive more.
Which was surprising, especially as most of the stuff Lewis was saying was criticizing himself. I think he was actually very, very open throughout the year about how poor a job he felt he was doing. But I think there's deeper problems there than the quality of a 7-time world champion in the car, is my opinion. But anyway, we'll see if they solve them next year.
Can one of you guys sing We Are the Champion? And then just be like, Nicole is the champion.
I refuse to do that.
Can you just...
I feel...
Why?
So down the stretch, I always had to go first. And then you guys just copied each other's picks. So you played it safe. But... In fairness,
Laz and I had like the same picks. If you go back and listen, we had very similar picks from week one. That's why I started writing them down and like showing you.
Yeah, that's proof.
This is what I got.
No, fair play. I think you had the lead all season as well, pretty much. So you've.
Well, when you are the worst, you should have to go first. That is sort of like the price you pay for bringing up the rear.
Okay, I think we did it differently in previous years, but that's fine. Rules change.
But also, Nate, you can't blame us for the quality of it if you were going first. Like you had freedom.
But I'm saying I made picks that you guys were like, well, I'm going to go safer than this. Maybe I was being too risky at the end. But I'm just coming. I
had my picks written down before you even started. For the record, my picks were written down. Yeah. Anyway, final standings: Nate with all of 12 points, Laz with 16, me with 18. For the record, Laurence and I we didn't score points the final two.
Yeah,
we didn't score points the final.
I was on single figures.
You scored one, Nate. One.
I was on single figures till the end of the season, I think. So.
What's crazy about that is that over 24 races, Nicole did the best out of the three of us, and still only got 18 of the top 3 positions right. So not just 18 actually getting the top 3, like just single drivers in the right place, which shows that for all the kind of boring races there were this season, it was pretty unpredictable, in terms of who was going to win races. You went into each race and it wasn't clear who was going to come out in front, which has not always been the case in F1 recently. So I think, it says a little bit about us, but it also says a little bit about how this season...
Yeah, I was going to say, you're being too kind about our talent.
I think it means that I did great. I think it means that I did a really good job to beat you two. And I would like to thank the Academy. I would like to thank my sponsors, the canteen ladies, my mom and dad for always believing in me. And here's to 2026. Speaking of 2026, I want to look ahead because obviously there have already been things that have come out. But I think the biggest sort of development is Helmut Marko's exit from Red Bull. When you look at where that team is headed in 2026, how does his departure impact what we're going to see from them?
Well, it's uncharted territory for them, really, isn't it? If you look at now, the pillars of that team coming into this decade have all gone, bar Max Verstappen. Obviously, Dietrich Mateschitz, the owner of the team, passed away in 22. We saw Newey's gone to Aston. Horner obviously left. And the funny thing with Marko is, I think he felt, right, this is great now. This is my team. I'm in control. Him leaving, I'm not sure how much impact it's going to have on the running of the race team itself in terms of operationally with the car. The big thing for him is going to be the fact that for so long he's been credited with overseeing that driver program, and I think that a lot of the chaotic decisions that have been made were kind of a 50-50 thing. Him and Horner always disagreed. The drivers were kind of a power play for the two of them, but I think the question we're all going to have is what it means for Max Verstappen. He's always said Marko is an important part of him being there. Marko brought him to the team. It is being framed as a retirement. I'd heard that there was talk of retirement even last year from Helmut Marko, but this seems a little bit different. That it seems like he's been kind of almost prodded to the end of the plank and then made to jump off on his own terms, but still was put on the edge of the plank by the team. So yeah, in terms of 26, I think it's fascinating because this Red Bull team now looks so different to the one that was able to reestablish itself as the best team on the grid. Max is still there. We've got Laurent Mekies is obviously doing a very good job there. But yeah, it's hard to imagine walking into that hospitality center. I mean, it was hard enough getting used to not seeing Christian there, from July onwards. Marko, the entire time I've been in Formula One, you walk in there and he is just sat, he is just sat in, same as Horner, they were just always in that hospitality center, always talking to people, always involved, always, kind of asking you what's going on around the place. And suddenly those guys aren't there. It's a good reminder that in Formula One, the power can, go away very quickly. But for me, the big thing that I can already see, Max getting annoyed with the questions early in the season when they come to him, but it's, what does this mean for you? Does this, a few years ago, I think it was Saudi Arabia 2024, I was in the press conference there where he said, I leave this team if Marko goes away. And that was a year and a half ago, so I think things have obviously changed internally since then, but yeah, very uncertain times there. And now suddenly, if Red Bull are in a bad position next year with the new engine, the new car, you do wonder if Marko's not there, is it easier for Verstappen to imagine, a world beyond Red Bull? So I think that's where for me, the fascinating part of the story is.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very different Red Bull going forward, isn't it? Much more corporate, Austrian controlled Red Bull, which is what the people in charge want. It's it's the direction of travel we've seen throughout this season, but I'm not sure it's really necessarily a good thing for the sport, because I mean there were a lot of things that Marko said which were absolutely not good for the sport, and things where he would really put his foot in his mouth and got things fundamentally wrong, as recently as the Qatar Grand Prix, where he claimed that Antonelli had given up fourth place to Lando Norris. But I think a lot of the essence of what Red Bull was and the edginess of Red Bull came from Horner and Marko, and whether actually getting rid of that could be a positive thing and it could actually unleash performance going forward. That is a possibility, but I think it's a tricky situation right now because, like they said, they're going in with their new engine next year. That's a huge job to pull off, something that was put in place by Horner, really. Horner had really worked hard to build that up, so it's going to be an interesting situation now. If that doesn't go well, there's going to be a lot of kind of blaming of the guys that are already not there, but then will that keep Max at the team? I very much doubt it. So yeah, like Nate said, it really does open up a lot of questions going forward, and whether Red Bull will continue to be the power that they have been in the sport up until now.
I mean, we were asking those questions even with Marko still there this season, but I also think change is inevitable. If not for nothing, we're talking about an 82-year-old man. Marko's 82. Not to be mean, but he's not going to stick around forever. Change is inevitable for a lot of reasons. And those questions about Red Bull were there already. I do think you went back to 2024 when Max said, I'm in this team because of Marko, and if Marko leaves, then I'm out too. I do think that they were under slightly different circumstances.
100%. Yeah.
The context in which the comments were made are different than what I think the retirement is happening now. I have questions about Red Bull, but I have questions about Red Bull, I think, whether Marko is there or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, it is true that I think Marko said in a recent podcast that he had, I don't know whether contract's the right word, because I'm not sure he had a exact kind of normal kind of employment contract in place, but he had an agreement to be there until the end of 2026. So, I mean, it was certainly on his mind, and I think he'd been speaking for some time about at what point, does he step back? And as you rightly point out, 82 years old is quite old to be traveling around the world as part of a Formula One team. But I think it's perhaps not so much that he's gone and that Horner's gone. It's just the speed at which all those changes have happened at Red Bull, including, I think, probably the biggest one of all in terms of performance on track as well was Adrian Newey leaving last year as well. Prior to that, Rob Marshall had left. Jonathan Wheatley left to go and be the Sauber team principal. Will Courtney has gone. He's on gardening leave at the moment. He was the head of strategy, and he's going to McLaren. So it's just the speed of change there's been at Red Bull creates a lot of questions. But I think if it does go wrong next year, I think they'll probably look and say, well, it was partly the plans that have been put in place by the old guard that have put us here. But to Nate's point, which is this point I was trying to make originally, is that that's not going to matter to Max Verstappen. I don't think Max has got any interest in hanging around at any team if it's not competitive and not able to deliver him race victories, even less so when he's lost a close ally like Helmut Marko at the team.
I was just going to shout out some reporting from one of the Dutch journalists that was fantastic this week. So Jackie Martins, who works at the Limburger, which is one of the newspapers in the Netherlands, he mentioned that this year the allyship between the Verstappens and Marko had become a bit strained. One of the things that I just wanted to let our listeners know, because I think it's an incredible bit of detail that Jackie Martins reported on, was we mentioned earlier that Lindblad had come up quite early. It seems that Marko's kind of final dealings in the driver program is what really pushed him towards the end. So Lindblad being signed early seems like a Marko call. The Alex Dunn situation. Now, Alex Dunn's a name that might not be too familiar with people listening, but Helmut Marko, according to a couple of the reports in the Netherlands, basically signed Alex Dunn from McLaren on a development deal. Red Bull Austria looked at it and said, "What on earth are you doing? We don't think he's the guy going forward." Helmut Marko said, "Well, I'm the godfather of the driver program. I say he is," and they say, "Well, we say he's not." They had to pay a lot of money to get Alex Dunn out of that, and Alex Dunn now seems to be on the verge of signing a deal with Alpine. That gives a glimpse a little bit into the fact that Marko had become a bit, he was shooting from the hip a little bit too much. And exactly what Laurence was saying, that corporate Red Bull, think Red Bull Leipzig, think, the Red Bull teams that company has. I can see them becoming, they've already become very corporate. I mean, you look at their the fun. I think the Austrians have tried to get back to some of the fun things of old, but that team has stopped running in the way that maybe has made it a captivating team. So Marko not being there is kind of one of the last cowboys that has kind of left the ranch of Red Bull, I think. So hopefully they've got a few more characters in the pipeline.
I think the cowboy explanation, or the cowboy idea, is a really good way to sort of like characterize him a little bit. There is a shoot from the hip. There is a speak first, think later, old school mentality that maybe doesn't fly anymore. And it does, among all the other things, it does sort of signal the shift in mentality a bit. This is like the most American thing ever, but the Super Bowl is kind of a big deal over here.
For the American football.
Gets a few eyeballs, no big deal. But Cadillac is going to unveil their livery during the Super Bowl. I'm a little biased. It's fine. But I love it. I love it because of the eyeballs, because of the excitement that already exists around the event. I love it because then it gets other people that may not be totally tuned in or dialed in with what this is or what's happening. It's just like introducing maybe a new audience potentially to it. So I really like what Cadillac is doing in their timing and the place. And yes, it's very American.
Yeah, this is huge as well, because remember one of the arguments against allowing Cadillac in as an 11th team when the idea was first floated from F1 was that, well, are they really going to bring the value to the sport that we need from an 11th team? Is it worth diluting the revenues that gets shared among the teams to an 11th team? Are they really going to add something to that? And I think this is a perfect example of where Cadillac can. I mean, I think we have to be realistic about Cadillac's what they can achieve on the track next year. I think Cadillac are realistic about that, but then there's what they can achieve off the track, and this is a great starting point. So I'm super excited to see, first of all, what the commercial looks like, because I know Super Bowl commercials are a big deal. Even in the UK, where we don't get to watch them live, we still see them all through YouTube and everything else. So it's always a big deal there. And just to see how they present it. And yeah, you're right, how much it helps just kickstart this F1 season and grab an audience that probably many of which have never really, maybe aware of F1, but never really watched it and think, oh, actually, cool, Cadillac are involved. Might see how they get on.
Yeah, I think it's so cool. I think that point about the value. I think Cadillac are enjoying the fact that they've already been able, they've secured this. They've got the big Disney Plus documentary with Keanu Reeves. They've gone all in on this F1 team, and I think that they're going all in a way that means if they are a bit slow performance wise in terms of getting up to speed, it will be fine because the size and the aura of what they're doing is kind of going to outweigh what's on the track. But yeah, I agree with you, Nicole. I mean, I think this is the other great thing that I think Cadillac are already doing is they're saying we're American. What's more American than going in the Super Bowl? I don't know what their car's going to look like, but the one thing that was always frustrating with the Haas team was they never lent into that thing. They were never like, let's put the stars and stripes on the car. Let's make it American. It was always just this corporate, machine tool colors a lot of the time, from Gene Haas's company. Cadillac, there's few things outside of America. There's few things that resonate as American more than Cadillac. Cadillac is just something that you hear. You think of Cadillac, you think of General Motors, you think of Detroit. It is, it's America. So I think they're doing a great job to do that. Nicole, you can answer me this because one of the frustrating things I have with watching the Super Bowl is we watch it and it starts after midnight, and usually the coverage in the UK is great, but what we miss, Laurence is right. You usually have to watch them on YouTube afterwards. You have to find them out, and because we have our own adverts, which are just usually not geared towards the Super Bowl, they're just bespoke adverts, right? Like, I really want to watch Super Bowl one day with the advert experience as part of it. Is that as big of a part of a Super Bowl as I know the game is huge, but is it like the halftime show? I was watching and reviewing and laughing along.
It is.
See, that's big in itself,
No,
then,
it
isn't
is.
it? Because people are gonna
Right. The whole thing.
Yeah.
The whole thing is
Yeah.
big. I think, because there's always you have a Super Bowl party, you're always hanging out with friends and eating and drinking and not just whatever. You're just there's it's a day. It's a day. The
Yeah.
Super Bowl is an entire day. It's not just the game. The weird thing about the ads are they now come out early. So you can see them before. And then obviously what you didn't see, you can see on YouTube and various platforms afterwards. But most of the time now, you've trained your brain to not pay attention to the commercials.
Right.
So I always find this early on in the Super Bowl, I'm watching it and then the commercials will come and I'll instinctively turn away to do whatever it is that I'm going to do next or whatever. And I need to remind myself, no, not today. And it is a thing. My kids, my girls are 12 and 9. They're not the biggest of sports fans, which is weird in this house, but they will watch the Super Bowl, whether it's because they're trying to see Taylor Swift or because they're interested in the commercials or they're interested in the halftime show. So I can get them involved because of that. I'm voting, by the way, I'm hoping it's a pink Cadillac.
Yeah, I mean, they've given hints of that, haven't they?
I'm really, really hoping for a pink Cadillac, and there are so many cultural ties to that. It's the funniest thing that they could do, and if I'll be honest, if it's a stars and stripes, put the bald eagle on it, Americana car, I'm gonna be so disappointed. If it's not a pink Cadillac, that's a fail. That's a fail.
Yeah, I feel like you've got an opportunity with that car to really
I know.
stand out. It's the Audi recently did their brand reveal, didn't they? Where and it was very Audi colors, and it's hard to see it until the sponsors go on it. But they kind of had the colors on the back, and it was a predominantly gray. And sometimes you want to grab these manufacturers and the guys making the cars. You want to say, look, guys, make this look great. Just make this look insanely cool. Fans will love it. People in 20, 30 years' time, people still talk about the Camel Lotus cars, don't they? Because of how great they looked. You could show someone that car and be like, how good does that look? It happened to be very good in Senna's car, etc. But people talk about stuff like that. So a pink Cadillac would be
But also make
be
it
great.
Make it so that when you see it on the track, you know exactly
Yeah.
who it is.
Yeah.
Whether it's running at the front or in the back, make it so that it is recognizable instantly. Don't leave it up for question. Don't leave it up for doubt. Is that is that the gray car or is that the blue car? Like,
Yeah,
just make it obvious as to who you are and own it. Like, obviously, there's been a pink car in Formula One before, but to have it be a pink Cadillac, like,
yeah.
come on, let's
Well,
go.
there's
Let's go.
there's also it would give me permission to just sing a Bruce Springsteen song all season as well. So, um, you know, I mean, I know a lot of people sang about pink Cadillacs, but he's actually got one called Pink Cadillac. So,
Yeah. Um, are you excited for the new 2026 cars and the new regs and whatever? Like, obviously, it's the end of the ground effects era. It's the end of DRS. Um, there are a lot of questions as to what we're going to see. Are you excited? Not excited? Where do we stand? I'm excited
I'm
for what it's
excited
worth.
because I think it's about time we had a change. You just mentioned a few
Mhm.
things, and the fact we talked about this season and a lack of excitement and overtaking says it all. Really, I don't think, given a blank sheet of paper, these are the regulations I would have come up with to ensure that going forward. I think they're going to take a lot of getting your head around, a lot of understanding why certain things are happening in the race, and potentially a lot of things going wrong early on in the season as well. That could add a bit of unpredictability, which is never a bad thing. But yeah, I think it's going to be a whole new almost language coming out of the F1 paddock in testing as to what the problems are with the car. A bit like when we had the start of this era and we started talking about porpoising, which was the cars bouncing up and down, which was actually an issue right up until the end of this year. There's going to be all these new issues and positives potentially as well to get your head around. I like that from my perspective as like a hardcore F1 fan. I like the fact that, we've got a whole new set of regulations to get our head around. I just hope they don't diminish the racing too much or become too complicated or just a bit too, difficult to get your head around.
yeah, early indications from some drivers has been very complicated to drive in the sim. There's a lot of things drivers have to do. I mean, obviously DRS is going away, isn't it, for an energy based system. So I've got some. I'm skeptical about it, but I think you always see with Formula One they kind of iron out some of the confusing bits. But I think the biggest thing that could really hurt Formula One is Laurence is right to mention 2014. It was my first year covering Formula One, and the difficulty we had explaining to a layman fan about the hybrid power units and the technicalities behind it all. I don't think it's going to be as complicated as that, but there are a lot of things going on with these cars that are going to be, pretty difficult to explain. Just to a casual fan who ultimately just wants to see who's got the quickest car and who's going to win with that. So, but then we did allude to it earlier. I don't think, hopefully, it surely can't be as bad as this year in terms of overall racing. So, if there's an improvement even there, I think we're in a good spot.
It made me laugh though when you were like, "Oh, drivers, they're complaining about it in the Sims, whatever." Like seriously, if you ever find
Yeah,
a driver who is completely happy, you found a unicorn. So, just don't hold your breath on that.
yeah, it's very, yeah,
Um,
true. Good point.
like even when they have a great car, they're like, "Meh, meh, meh." They're I live with one, so it's not that I can't throw him under the bus as well. Um, Is there a team or a driver that most intrigues you for 2026? I sort of have a small list, and they're all for different reasons, but, like, is there a team or a driver that you've got up there? Yeah, he's pointing back at the book. Ferrari's at the top of my list too.
I think for me, I mean, just given what happened this year, given the John Alkin comments, given that Charles Leclerc looks like, he's at least has got it in his head, like, okay, maybe my future's not at Ferrari, given that Lewis has gone there and has underperformed. I think Ferrari, it's all about Ferrari next year, not just because of the implication of 26, but the implication for Ferrari of just being off the pace for another regulation cycle, or at least not being the team to beat. I mean, after a while, if that happens again, you start to wonder, how does that team get beyond that? What do they do? So for me, it's them. Like I mentioned earlier about the six race thing with the clerk. I think I mentioned it I think I said it on a pod before, but there's nothing that would sum up Ferrari's failures more than Leclerc leaving that team, given what he means to that team, but also what that team means to him. And just the fact that I think deep down, he just wants to stay there forever and drive Ferraris for the rest of the time. If you drive him away by just not getting a regulation change right, then that's pretty telling. But I've got I've got some optimism. You know, Ferrari did stop developing this year's car quite early. I think that's worth pointing out. And Ferrari do tend to develop cars very well around regulation changes. What happens is when they get to the regulation change and suddenly everyone is criticizing the performance, they then lose their way. So hopefully they have a good baseline next year on both the engine and the aerodynamic side. But I think it's a huge year for a lot of people who work at that team. You know, from the ground up to the very top. You know, to John Elkann as well, because you know John Elkann has presided over this Ferrari team now for a little while. So yeah, I think it's got to be them.
I would say Aston Martin's the other team which I'm really intrigued by, just because obviously Adrian Newey going there, now becoming the team principal as well, not a role that any of us thought he was going to move into when he first left Red Bull and went to Aston Martin. But they just have all the facilities as well. They have everything there. I mean, I've been to that factory a few times now. They're often invite us over during the British Grand Prix weekend because it's literally across the road from the entrance to Silverstone. And everything there is in place, but it's quite clear that perhaps, you know, not everything is perfectly happy behind the scenes, given the changes in management. Andy Cowell being moved into a position which I think will suit him, overlooking Honda and the fuel supplier and the lubricants and all the rest of it, and making sure that all marries with the chassis is absolutely Cowell's expertise. But it seemed quite late in the day that they made that change. It also seemed like Adrian Newey wasn't the most natural fit as team principal. So what's really going on there? Are they going to hit the ground running, or do they already know that they're not going to hit the expectations they need, and therefore changes are already being made? And then, of course, you know, Honda coming in, a big change for them, but Honda are a magnificent engine manufacturer that up until this year had won the previous 4 with Red Bull. So it's almost like there's no more excuses for Aston Martin. Everything is in place, and they finished 7th this year as well. So that's not great, of course, but it does mean that they get extra aero development compared to the teams that they want to be their rivals, against McLaren, who won the Constructors' Championship, and then Mercedes, Red Bull and Ferrari. You know, they're going to have a significant more amount of development because that's the way the regulations are set to allow teams to catch up if they've been doing poorly. So it's almost like they will have run out of excuses by the end of next year if they're not at least tracking towards podiums and race wins. Maybe it is too much to expect an immediate turnaround, but if they're not tracking towards that, if it's not all the signs that are lining up that they're going there, then that's a big deal. So, and also just to see what Adrian Newey can come up with under a new regulation set. He arrived a little bit later than you would have wanted, because the work on these cars started basically at the start of this year. Is when they were allowed to start putting stuff in the wind tunnel and through CFD. And Newey was 3 or 4 months later than that, but still he's had a lot of time to get his head around the regulations and then come in and kind of say, right, this needs to be here, this needs to be like that. Here's the overall concept, and then the team will work on a lot of the details. So for me, that's a fascinating one. But I think also speaks a lot to Formula One right now, because, and Nicole, I'm sure you've got teams as well that you could name, but there's a whole bunch who are really leveling up. Sauber becoming Audi, you know, Cadillac coming on the grid, Williams with their turnaround that they've done over the last year. There's so many that you could pick and say, this should really be their year. And of course, that's never the case. There's always one team or several teams that are further back down the grid.
I think you can go top to bottom and make a case for every team as to why they could be the most intriguing. And then honestly, you have to look at McLaren. They did not have moments this year where they maybe handled things the best way internally with personnel. And they did have to focus a lot on this season to get their drivers the championship. They've won the Constructors' Championship 2 years in a row. You know, the pressure is on them now. It is going to be an intriguing conversation to see how they follow up on everything. And I do think in terms of driver relationships, what did Piastri sort of learn from this season? How is he going to be different next year based on how everything played out this year? Ferrari, top of list for all the reasons that Nate said. Williams, to me, is a team that is ahead of schedule. They've sort of said the same thing. I think the 2, surprise podiums this year from Carlos are just that. They're surprising, but it's also sort of like a tip of the hat to the work that's being done behind the scenes and also the potential that exists. For me, and this sort of leads into the next question I'm going to have too. It's Mercedes. Mercedes was second in the Constructors' Championship this season. They were the other team to get wins this season with George, and George got a couple of them. There were times when we were looking at Kimi as being an actual contender to do something more than just get on the podium. He had the sprint race pole in Miami. They're already being looked at as sort of like the team to beat next season. And with expectations comes sort of the conversation of, can you live up to them? And it's been a few really lean years for Mercedes, and they lost Lewis Hamilton. So what can they do? And can they live up to the expectations that are already being set? But again, like, you could go through top to bottom and have a conversation about every team as to why they're intriguing. Haas losing their title sponsor and then having the agreement with Toyota Gazoo. What does that look like? How does that impact their development and things that they do down the line? Um, yeah, it's like literally every team from top to bottom. But I'm gonna end this with something that I know we love to do. Our way too early predictions are our wildest predictions. When you look at 2026, is your way too early prediction to be the drivers' champion next season? And you know what, Nate? I'm not gonna make you go
Oh,
first. I'm gonna make Laurence go first.
I was about to go, but I appreciate it, Nicole. Um,
Well,
who,
I'll happily go first, and I'll show you, Nate, that you can still play it safe despite going first. So I'm going to buy in to all of the hype around Mercedes, and also say that I think, because I don't think we've really touched on it in this podcast as a season review, how good George Russell's season was. I think if he'd been in that McLaren, I think he probably would have beaten both of those drivers there. Slightly controversial opinion, maybe, but I think he was that good.
Can you all see that?
He was that good this year. So I'm just going to lay it out there straight away. George Russell as the way too early prediction for 2026, because who knows, maybe we get to testing and the Mercedes just blows up every time it goes out on track.
I'm not even going to let you go second, Nate. And I just showed it because this is just proof. I wrote this. It's backwards, but you can see it. I wrote George like hours ago. Same thing. For all the same reasons. Yeah. That's all I got. George.
Yeah, I think it is difficult to look past it, isn't it? Just given what we are expecting from that team. I was going to throw. This is probably why I didn't win my predictions. I do think it's going to be George, just to clarify. But my left field one was going to be Fernando Alonso, just because
I like it.
I want to totally buy into the fact that Newey built.
I don't hate it.
Yeah, that Newey builds him an absolute rocket ship, and we just have a year of Fernando Alonso just winning races and winning the title. I think we talked about how great the Max thing was this year. That would be an absolute fever dream, and I'd like that more than Ferrari winning a championship. Just given how long he's been in the sport for, but also it would kind of be a great thing for that story of that race team as well. So non-serious answer is Fernando Alonso, the very safe, predictable one, but for good reason, is George Russell. But yeah, I think it's telling, isn't it, that we've all gone for a Mercedes powered champion, because it does seem like that is going to be the package that wins. But I want to throw this to you guys. I know no one thinks that the Red Bull project is going to be the one to beat. But to me, this year proved that even if Red Bull is still kind of, they're competitive enough, you just cannot write off Verstappen, regardless of what that car looks like. Obviously, if the car is genuinely awful, then, there's a limit that anyone can do. I mean, look at Fernando Alonso as an example of that. But if the car's even semi-competitive, we know how good Verstappen is across the season. Consistency next year might well be a key thing in terms of if there's lots of random results. So I think, Max is still, every season we go into, he's got to be in the back of the mind of like, this guy could win it. This guy could.
If Max is in a car.
Yeah, right.
If Max is in a car, if Max is in a team, you cannot overlook him. Period.
100%.
End of discussion.
Yeah, it's like when they say in the NFL, all roads go through Indianapolis when you're the number one seed or whatever. All roads go through Verstappen still in Formula One. They just have to. The way. I think, teams have to prepare for that now. Like, you've got to be mentally ready to beat you've got to hear that Jaws music and see Chucky coming at you, as Zach Brown said. So not my pick, but I think it's worth saying that Verstappen should be in that conversation at least.
Mm-hmm. Don't disagree. This is a little sad, but I think that's where we're going to end it. I love you both. It's been so much fun. This is not the end, obviously, but
Yeah, we just don't know, do
yeah,
we? We're not sure what's next.
no, we don't. Thank you for listening to Unlapped every single week of the year. Thanks for following along on the journey. Thanks for following those guys on Instagram and reading their stories. They do brilliant work, and they will continue to do brilliant work because, like, we will still cover Formula One. It just might look a little different in terms of what we do week in and week out. But guys, safe travels. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for the insight. Thank you for your brilliance and the laughs and all of those things. You are loved and you will be very, very missed. So remember, like and subscribe. You can find their content all the time on the ESPN F1 YouTube channel. Read their stuff, follow them on Instagram. And if you're following us someplace else, that's awesome as well. Just hit us up with a 5-star review. This has been Unlapped. Nate, Laurence, Nicole, peace out.
Peace.